for those that came an hour early and turned up again at the right time. And to the rest of you, we apologize for the mishap we had with the starting time earlier on. This is yet another LIDNUG RedGate partnership, and we're going to have Anthony van der Hoorn. He's going to show us how to build agnostic apps through the power of HTTP. But before I hand over to Anthony, I'm just going to go through a bit of housekeeping and get some information out of the way. First of all, I want to thank all of our sponsors, both Orgsweb, Telerik, and Pluralsight, for their continued support. Many of the events and other benefits we are able to offer our members comes from their continued support. Lastly, but certainly not least, we also want to thank Syncfusion for their continuous community support. It is greatly appreciated, guys. Some LIDNUG info. If anybody have any questions, feel free to email us at info@lidnug.org. You can also follow us on Twitter. It's twitter.com/LIDNUG. Secondly, our Facebook page, facebook.com/LIDNUG. And all of our recordings are also going to be uploaded to our LIDNUG channel. This recording is not going to go up there. We have some 40-odd recordings up there from the past year and a half, so feel free to go up there and have a look at them at any given time. Lastly, our LinkedIn home is bit.ly/LIDNUG. That's where you can find all the discussions that goes around the frameworks that we work with, suggestions, questions, and any type of meaningful help. Upcoming event, the next event we have is, I think it's our 12th WinSelect and LIDNUG partner event, and this is with John Robbins. He's going to show us in ITemplate the key to better day-to-day debugging. John Robbins has been presenting for us 3 or, if I'm wrong, 4 times now, and it's each been a jam-packed session. About Anthony van der Hoorn, this is his first LIDNUG event. I definitely want to thank Anthony for coming up at 3 a.m. in the morning. Anthony is now living in, I think it was Canberra or Brisbane, after a stint in New York City. He's a co-founder of Glimpse. You can get that at getglimpse.com. Sorry, he's in Brisbane, I've been told. Glimpse is an open source web-based debugging tool. It helps you to find out both what happens on the client and on the server at the same time. Quite handy for all web development. He's also socially based. Catch him on Twitter, Anthony_VDH. On the side, he is also an avid photographer, and you can see quite a lot of his photography, his photos at anthonyvanderhoorn.com. And also, he has a technical blog called Coding Dilemma, and you can find it at www.blog.anthonyvanderhoorn.com. Last but not least, happy birthday to Peter Shorty Shaw. He is one of our group managers. He's turning 40 years young today, and he is still behaving like one of the young guys. So happy birthday, Peter. Now from that, I want to hand over to Anthony. Anthony, thank you very much for getting up at 3 a.m. in the morning to present to our members, and we certainly appreciate that.
Yep, it's quite early here, but happy to be here, and thank you very much, Brian, for having me on board. We might as well get started. I'm going to switch over and we're going to start sharing the slide deck. Okay, that should come through now. Okay, so as mentioned, my name is Anthony van der Hoorn. I'm currently living in Brisbane, Australia. I spent a few years in New York City, and in that time I co-founded an open source project called Glimpse with Nick Molnar, and this talk is kind of a bit of a lessons learned out of our experiences with Glimpse. When we started working on Glimpse, we didn't have any grand vision of architecture or anything like this, But as we went along, we actually found out that we'd actually come up with some pretty good practices, and we'd started using things that turns out you actually should be using. And so with that, we might as well get into it. So we created this website to run the slides through. You can get to that at any point. Let me just go here. You can see we've got talk on agnostic clients here. You can just download all of this source code and run the project yourself. So that's all I'm running in this website at the moment. I'm sure we'll make that link available to everyone at the end. So without further ado, we're just going to kick off. Okay, so what is Glimpse and what problem are we trying to solve? So as mentioned, Glimpse is a web diagnostics platform, if you will. And so the way we kind of consider it is that, as it says here, it's the open source diagnostics platform of the web. What we do is we make it very easy for authors like yourself or framework authors to be able to display any data that they have on their server within the client, and we'll take a look at what that looks like in a minute. And we also make it very easy for any client-side frameworks to do the same. So Glimpse is a platform. Now, what we had the challenge of, and what we realized very early on, is that Glimpse is, and just as a side note, you're seeing a future version of Glimpse here. Some of this stuff that you're seeing here hasn't been released. What Glimpse actually does is it can actually run on multiple server backends. Okay, so what I mean by that is you can imagine this client is just all JavaScript, CSS, HTML in the browser. And it's a format that we're sending JSON data over the wire back and forth to for what tabs should be shown. So configuration, environment, execution, all of this sort of stuff is all just tabs of data that we show and is in the payload. And because of that, the client is actually agnostic of the server that it's connecting to. So it doesn't really care if that server is a .NET server or a PHP server or whatever else. And so we soon came to a realization that, wait a second, we could actually have multiple server backends. Okay, so we could have, just 2 secs. Okay, I'm just going to reduce the size of the screen down to try and help some of those who mightn't have as big a screen resolution. Hopefully that's a bit better. And so basically we realized that we could have totally different server backends, and that wouldn't really be an issue. And once we did that, we actually prototyped, or people from the community prototyped, well, what would a PHP solution look like? What would a, Python solution look like? And with that, as long as we're all sending the same data payloads, we actually can have the same client running. And to achieve that, because that was one of our goals, primarily our goal at the beginning was to be able to have multiple clients, because the thought was that when we were originally discussing the concept for Glimpse, we only had a very, very short period of time to come up with a prototype, and so we decided, hey, let's just try and create something in JavaScript and HTML, and then later on we can create a full-on browser plugin. And because of that, we needed to make sure we got some of these contracts right and some of this technology in place to make sure that worked. And out of that, we actually found that we got a lot more benefit from the reverse, i.e. being able to have multiple servers, because the client-side plugin ended up working much better than what we had anticipated it working, and hence what we have today. So just showing a couple of different views of data that we get, and you can even see we have like an interactive timeline within Glimpse. So that's basically Glimpse in a nutshell. Now, in terms of architecture, you might have heard me mention before, and I might just try and bump some of this font as well to help out with some of those people who are having trouble with the font before. Okay, so as you can see here, we've got the client front ends, okay, of which we only have JavaScript. We have what we call the glimpse protocol, which is what the client and server communicate back and forth with and understand. It's not a real protocol, it's more of a schema understanding, and then we have multiple server backends. And as you can see, we have ASP.NET on the .NET stack, and we can also have something like Web API, ManCFX, and then, at the moment we have PHP, Python, and in the future we're looking at having Node.js and Rack. So you can see that we have quite a diverse landscape. And the most important part for us is that, we can have this one client speaking to any one of these backends. Now, you might be going, well, my project's never going to need one client to talking to multiple backends. But it's actually interesting when we did the architecture this way, we actually found out that a lot of best practices came through that. And it's those best practices that we're going to take a look at today. So continuing on. So, as you might have seen on the homepage, we're going to be taking a look at these various aspects that we discovered along the way and try and tick each one of these off. So we're going to start off with cause. So how do we know where a request is coming from, and if we need to be able to work with any domain? So it turns out that browsers have this thing called CORS, okay, or CrossOrigin Request policies or resource sharing. And it turns out that they don't like it very much when if you've got a web page coming from, let's say, localhost, okay, or example.com, if you try and get it from a subdomain or a totally different domain, the browsers will actually block that request. So we have to come up with different strategies for being able to do that, okay? Because typically in a diverse landscape, you're going to have resources hosted in different domains for different services, yet you want to be able to access those resources. So if we have a look at what the solution is here, instead of in a JavaScript file just returning a normal JSON payload, okay, that looks like this, we can actually wrap our payload up in inside of a function callback. Okay. Now, what this has the benefit of doing, that instead of just being raw JSON that's sent down to the client, we're actually saying, hey, with this function that you send, with this data that you send down to the client, please call this function passing the data into it. Okay. So basically, this means that we can have data coming from any domain that we want and injecting data into it. So we can actually have a look what that might look like. So here's what a JSON result set looks like. We're actually talking back to the server. Okay, and here's what a JSONP result set looks like. As you can see, I've just thrown this type property on here so that we can see the difference between them. It absolutely has no difference in the end result. Okay, it's just how we invoke our API on the client. Now, there is some problems with JSONP. Okay, primarily it comes down to how much do you trust the remote server that you're talking to. Okay, because me as the server author is the one who decides there's conventions around how to pass like which callback that you'd like called to the server, okay, but they're not enforced. Okay, so the server author could change this method to be whatever he wants. Okay, so in theory, whoever is controlling the server can control any method inside of your client. Okay, so in the case that you're controlling the server, this is obviously not an issue, but you do want to trust the remote server you're talking to. And just to prove that all of this is working the way that we expect it to, I'm just going to open up Chrome Developer Tools here, and we can trigger a JSON results request. Okay, and we can come here and we can see that the preview or the payload, and we can actually see that it was just a plain JSON object that was called back. Okay, whereas if we come through and do a JSONP result, okay, you see we've got a little bit more in the query string here to help us define, hey, we want cache busting and what callbacks we actually want called. But then you can actually see that in this case, we're calling callback, which is a function on the client that will be called, and it's passing in this payload. Okay. Now, it turns out that because of some of these trust issues, we actually do allow traditional AJAX requests to remote domains, okay, using a technology or a technique called CORS, okay, and that's all about allowing the standard XML HTTP request that would fail if we tried to receive a normal JSON payload via an AJAX call to a remote browser or remote server. But in this case, if the server and the client both accept the CrossOrigin requests, then we can actually get this to work. Now note, there is some compatibility issues with this technique that you will need to have a look into, but essentially what that looks like is when we actually do a request, we can see that here this time we're getting the data payload and it's called CORS, and actually dumping out all the headers here. We can see there's a new header called access control allowed origin, and star here means that any domain can actually request that data. So yeah, this is how you'd start setting things up in the future for proper cross-origin requests. And there is a lot in terms of resources available to help you through this, and different fallback strategies, kind of like if anyone's familiar with sockets, where you can have different fallback strategies, i.e. your browser doesn't support sockets, so it'll fall back to long polling, and if it doesn't support long polling, then we'll try everframes. So those sort of techniques are available here, and you don't really need to take care of. So within Glimpse, how we handle this is we have a version check service, for instance, that sits on version.getGlimpse. That's not technically right, but for all intents and purposes here. And what we do is it asks, is there a newer version available? And so if there is, we send down to the client, okay, the initial, we can send down to the client the updated version number. We also use the same technique if we were to host, let's say, the Glimpse client, and we don't do this at the moment, but we could on a CDN, okay, because that means we'd be going to a remote server for some of our data assets and stuff like that. But primarily where we use this technique is in the Glimpse payloads, okay, so we have initializing the metadata and initializing the data. Okay, and with this, we don't have to worry about any domain issues that that the user's setup might have. We just work. So there's a practical example of how that all is set up and works. So moving on. So how can we work with any domain? We need to know the resources that are available. Okay, so let's say we know we're connecting to a server, and because we're connecting to any server, okay, in our case, we need to know what it currently supports, okay, because a server with Node.js might support the same features as the .NET service does. Now, in your scenario, this becomes important because even if you have the one server backend, different resources may be available at different points. Not every resource is available all the time. And the other important thing that we need to take into account is that links can change over time. So let's say you have a resource that, like a save or an update or getting some sort of metadata URL endpoint that you usually make AJAX request calls to. We don't want to hard code those URLs into the browser, okay, or into the client rather. So how do we start solving this problem? So what we can actually do is there's an RF6570, okay, and we can talk about this a little bit more down the track. But essentially, what it says is that we can have a metadata object, okay, and inside of that we can define what resources. Now note, this isn't a particularly reserved property, that's just something that we have declared in our case, and with that we
that was very, very loud.
Look, Brian, I think you might have your mic turned on there. Just 2 seconds, people. Okay, now what we can actually do is, as you've seen, we've got this metadata payload, and inside of the payload we have a resources property. And as I was mentioning, that's not specifically a reserved property or anything like that, but inside of that we've got these different resources specified. So with these resources, we can actually say what's the URL templates look like, and that's where this RFC comes in. We can actually define templates for what URL is accessed. So in a quote scenario for currency trading, we'll need to be able to provide which currency pair we care about, okay? And so URL templates actually provide us with a way of saying, I want this currency pair value injected into the URI, okay? So we have that, and I've just changed over mouse batteries. So give me 2 seconds, guys. Okay, here we go. And so where we do this on Glimpse, okay, as you can see here, we have our metadata payload, which is a part of the metadata payload that I mentioned on the previous screen. And we can see here that we have all sorts of resources. Now, it turns out we prefix our resources or namespace them so that if plugin authors want to add resources to this list, we don't get any collisions in naming. And then we have what our URIs look like. And if you see here, you can see like the request one is where we go to get the data for a given request. You know, Ajax is where we can get a list of all child requests for a given page, etc. So now you might be saying, well, where do I actually go to actually get that initial metadata? Now, at the moment, there's no standard, okay, for doing this. There's a lot of recommendations and a lot of talk about what people are trying to do. And so particularly for non-browser applications, we want to actually be able to find this, okay? So we want a document home, as it were, somewhere where we can go and we know that the documentation exists. So to do this, we can actually have a look for a home document for an API, and what that might actually look like is here. So we can actually do a request to the root of the domain, and if we pass through the given media type, and we'll get more into media types as we go along, okay, but if we say that the particular resource we're after is JSON home, okay, and this is all just recommendations and specs at the moment, we can actually get back a payload that looks like this. And as you'll see, it's very similar to the custom payload that we came up with before, where we had resources and we had names and then we had URIs. But in this case, the names are URIs, okay? And this could be anything. It doesn't have to be a URI. The spec says so, but this is just a key as far as how we interpret it. But then within that, we can actually have hrefs, okay, and we can actually have, so that would be where widget actually exists, but then we can also say that here's a href template, and this is what the template actually looks like, and then we can actually have, you know, where can you actually get the valid values that widget ID could be, and then we can also have these hints of what this href or href template actually allows. So in this case, we're saying that we allow a get, a put, a delete, and patch, and you know what media types we actually accept for all of those. So we are trying to solve some of these problems in a predictable way, as you will have seen when you go to the root passing through JSON home. So moving on, URI template. So we've been talking about these URI templates, and as I mentioned before, within Glimpse we came across this problem of I want the client data for a given request, but I need to know what the URI is for that resource. So where can I actually go, like question mark ID, equals something. I need to know what that is, because in some cases it might be like in some servers might want it to be ID equals, okay, versus other servers might just want it to be slash and then the actual ID of the request. So by doing everything that we've talked to today, we'll actually have the required metadata to know that, one, this resource is available, and two, that it's a URI template that we can actually evaluate and inject our data into. So this is a problem that we're trying to solve, and this is probably one of the biggest takeaways from this talk that I'd say. Is definitely worth looking into RF 6570. So all of this sort of stuff, because it's not just a simple string token replacement, because the semantics around how you would replace a given parameters within a query string are very much fairly domain specific to URIs. So for instance, if I want to inject this ID, okay, it's not just a simple string token replacement like I might have up here, because how do we know if this has a value, whether or not we need the question mark, for instance, or whether, particularly when parameters are optional, whether or not they need, the first one needs the question mark and then the later ones need ampersands or whatever it might be. So as we come down here, we can actually run through some of these and actually see that the data is available for these. If you just give me 2 seconds. Mouse is playing up again. Okay, so we can actually run these and we can actually see here, we're saying here's a quote, and we're going to have 2 URI arguments that we can have, and both of these you should, if they're available, okay, you should include the question mark and then deal with like the ampersand difference between the 2. So when I evaluate this or run this, this is the end result that comes through. Likewise, if I've only got the 1, okay, it's smart enough to know that it can leave off the number, okay, and as we go through, we can actually see that it can actually deal with a fair few different scenarios, okay. And I'm just going to run through these. So you can see here we said that if it's available, optionally include the ampersand. You can deal with lists of data, okay, and we can actually force it to, instead of just adding the list, add a parameter for each one. Okay, so this is the sort of stuff that we can start doing. And in Glimpse's case, this is what some of the URI templates look like for us. Okay, and so here, where we actually want the request ID to for the end URL to look like this, where the ID is 123 and the version number of Glimpse that we're talking to is this, we can actually have URI templates that look like this. And the spec will take care of that. And it turns out there's actually quite a few implementations of URI templates. So this is within a lot of the community. This is a fairly well-known spec. You can actually come along here and actually download the version for C#, JavaScript, which is what I'm happening to be running here, any other language you like. So really, really useful spec. And you can see here we're using it all the way through. So now, in terms of where we're up to, we've defined how we can get our metadata, i.e. we're not going to run into any security issues because we're using CORS or JSONP. We also know whereabouts our metadata exists, okay, in a predetermined place. We also know that we have resources defined about what the server actually supports, okay, at any given point in time. And then for whatever the server supports, we now have a way of injecting data into the URI so that we can actually request the right resources that we actually want. So if we continue on here, so next we kind of build up media types. Now, traditionally, if you've ever dealt with media types, you might be going, well, why not just use application/data, okay? But what the above says is we want any JSON, okay? And typically this isn't true, okay? What we actually want is a specific schema implementation of a JSON response, okay? And we also have a problem with how do we version things, okay? And we're going to see how these all fit when you start looking into them. So what we actually have is that when you actually look into content types, there's actually a bit of a format that we're supposed to follow. So anything that doesn't accept any JSON, i.e. in our case, we're wanting glimpse payloads. So, and when I say that, all I mean is that if we were to accept any data when we requested the response from, or the payload from the server for, what just happened with a given request, we can't just accept anything. We actually want something specific in return in a specific format. Okay, and this just lets us define what schema we actually want to accept. So if we're in that case, which the vast majority of us are, okay, in practice, we'll have this vendor prefix, okay, and this just lets, this is just us being good citizens to the world and letting them know that, hey, we're a vendor and this type is custom to us. What the vendor name is, okay, then what the subtype is, the data, and then we can actually include a version number in here. Now there's a couple of different ways of handling version, and it does come down to semantics. I'm not religious either way. In these circles there's a lot of people that feel one way or the other, and we'll talk a little bit more about versioning in a sec. And then finally the plus JSON, okay, which is partly what the browser cares about when it interprets this. It really doesn't care about anything prior to the plus, okay? Anything inside of what's highlighted here is just application specific, okay? But again, if we're trying to build either agnostic clients or agnostic servers, when the client is talking to a particular server, it's good to know that the data payload that it's sending back is of a particular subtype, okay, i.e. that it's what we expect it to be, and that it's the correct version of that schema implementation. So when we actually run it here, we can actually see we've made a request to the server, and this is the payload that we got back. And then here in the content type, instead of just having, application/JSON, we've actually requested from the server, and it sent back that, right, you're a vendor, you are glimpse, okay, and in this case we're receiving a person back. And with that, the client can actually double check that, yep, the server has sent me the correct format of the data back. And also with that, I'm receiving the correct version of that schema implementation that I expect. And so in practice within Glimpse, what we do is when a request goes out, the client actually says that I accept version 1, okay, of a given request, of a request payload. And this is important too because we have multiple servers. Each could have a different client, okay, and a server author may be in the process of updating to a new client, and hence it supports version 2+ only, okay, of this contract, okay, but the server doesn't yet support it. So when it responds, it would say that, wait a sec, I only support version 1 of your spec, okay, or I only support version 2 rather, you do something less, hence we have a mismatch here. So that's how we all operate. So next we end up coming to the conclusion that now that we have, media types taken care of, i.e. we have everything we've built up to date, and on top of that, we're looking at, okay, with the media types, we've said, right, we know what data we're getting, we know what version of it is, and we know how to interpret it. The next problem that we typically run into is how do we drill around data, okay, like paging, because we've received these this metadata from the server, okay, that says here's all the resources available, but you really shouldn't have to have a different resource for next and a different resource for previous, okay, in like a paging scenario. The data should be self-subscribing, okay, or describing. It should say where to go to get more data. And this is all around semantics, okay, and this is all around, you know, particularly something called Richard's maturity model, okay, where we're having a look at how mature is our API. If the API can describe to whoever's consuming it where you need to go to get the data, that's a fairly mature model. Okay, and so if we have a look here how this might look in practice, is that when we get, so this is like a shares portfolio scenario, so we're receiving a portfolio, there's we're looking at the portfolio of M. Jones and J. Smith, okay, and they've got a given ID, and then we can see inside of that we're getting the links to where we need to go to get more data, okay? So this might actually look very familiar, okay, to what we saw in the initial metadata payload, and you might think of that initial metadata payload as like the root resources, okay, and then inside of the payloads itself I'm going to include you know, the sub resources. So I know that when I'm looking at M. Jones, if I want to see their book or their portfolio, okay, I know where I can actually go to find those. Okay, so this is what we would start looking at. So yeah, so that's what we can actually start looking at, and that's extremely important, because when we have those resources, that here's where you need to go for more information, i.e. a shopping cart scenario, that might be you've got to go to the next step in completion. Okay, it should be the server and not the client determining what is the next step. Okay, the client, so for instance, if the client is already being, as in the user, has already had their credit card authorized, the server may say, well, you can skip that authorization step, so go to this URL next in the process of checking out. Whereas in most clients are hard-coded that after you finish with one step in the workflow, here's the next step to go through. Whereas we actually want that to be responsive based on the server's needs and requirements. So what this starts leading us on to next is that something's missing. And I kind of mentioned this earlier on, that we could start doing feature toggling. So when we have a different service, okay, and one server supports more than the other, or one server isn't quite up to date, or you've just got the one server, okay, and a particular service is down at the moment, okay, then this becomes really important for us to know. And this is where we can start doing some feature toggling, in essence, to say, well, what services are available and what are not. So you can see here that in our initial metadata payload, we might have, you know, here we can see 3 resources, and we can see we've got streaming quotes. But then at another point when we request the resources, you can see that it's missing, okay? And this, again, there's no standard around this yet. This is just the way we've implemented it. But in this case, we'd interpret that as, okay, when the client goes to see, well, what's the URI for streaming quotes? It's not there, hence the server doesn't support it, doesn't even know about it, okay, in this case. And so we might display something in the UI, or we may just not turn on that feature. So yeah, that's what we do. And we can see that implemented here, where Ajax, okay, so this is back to our initial response payload before, and you can see I'm actually showing a little bit more. You can see the URI templates that are here, as well as the resources, and we can see that in this payload that might have come from .NET, we support viewing Ajax data or Ajax client requests, whereas here you can see that it's missing. And so that's where we would go, okay, in the client, sorry, we don't support that feature. Okay, so next, now that we have everything, we want to start optimizing things. We start talking about, well, how do we scale? How do we make things run faster? How do we reduce latency? And how do we reduce network traffic? And all of this comes back to caching. And what we can actually start having a look at when we look at caching is it's actually broken down in 3 ways. So we have how fresh is our data, validation, okay, of whether or not we should whether or not our content is stale, okay, and then we need to have a look at invalidation, okay, so when the client wants to force getting new payloads. So we can have a look here and we can actually see that we've got our cache content through our cache control, which we've mentioned up here. And we can actually see that it's public, okay, which when we break all of this down, it says who is allowed to cache this, is it the client, is it any proxies along the way, and then how long can actually, how long is this version of the data good for. Then we can have a look at what one of our response payloads look like. So you can see here that when it's a particular payload is requested, i.e. slash request, we can see that anyone can cache it along the way, that it has max age here, our E tag, so for verification purposes, and then we can see when things were last modified, okay, which also helps with the max age. And so conclusion, what we've done here is we've started to create a pretty self-sustaining ecosystem. We're actually using HTTP to the max, which is kind of cool. And we've also, not that I've really used the words here, okay, but we've kind of reached that REST nirvana that, you know, a lot of these guys talk about in the REST community, where if we're doing everything that we've mentioned before to get to this point now, we actually have a pretty world-class REST service implementation. Now, no, we didn't get to that overnight, okay? But I hope you can see that a lot of that stuff that I was showing is incremental, okay? It's, you know, for instance, starting off with URI templates might be a place where you start. So wherever you have a hard-coded URI or you've got your own logic for building up a URI template, you can replace that with, you know, with the RFC 6570, okay, and one of the implementations here. And one of the cool things in our case is we have URI templates that need to be resolved on both the server and the client. And because the implementation is the same, i.e. the template format is the same, we can share those templates between client and server. And that's one really small thing that you can do, but will actually take you a hell of a long way. Okay. Also looking at like that initial metadata payload response that says, here's what resources are available. That's another small step that you can do that, you know, when a page is being rendered, the server sends down as part of the payload, here's the resources that this page requires, and these are what are available at the moment. Okay, and being responsive to that. You might then put logic into the server in the back end that gives you the ability to turn off writes temporarily or something like this. And so if the client happens to request a page that they want this functionality to be able to do that, then that functionality wouldn't light up, or I'll show them a message or whatever else. So you can see that building on top of this is very, very logical and very, very easy to do. And that, you know, when it comes to things like HATEOAS and all these fancy terms that people start using with REST, you're actually getting really close. And if we actually take a look at like the Richardson maturity model, which is one of the guiding landmarks here, okay, we can actually see that we've got 3 different levels here, okay, and what we actually start doing here is, you know, it's small steps, but all of this looks can look really complicated, okay, to actually achieve, but with everything that we've talked about there, we've actually reached this end nirvana, okay, where we have these different resources, okay, that are being defined, and the payloads itself are defining where you need to go next, you know, etc. So really, really cool stuff. And so in the real world, you know, we are doing this. We have this set up in the Glimpse ecosystem. Nothing what we're doing there is particularly complex, but as I can't stress it enough, we actually do have a pretty kick-ass Rust ecosystem going here. And that was very much through a process of evolution, not through grand design. Okay, and it was, we need to have a better solution for, you know, URI templates, or for what we now call URI templates. How do we do that? Okay, and that's where all of this comes into play. And if we actually want to take a look at some of this, and I'll come back to that in a sec. I actually built this sample, okay, which does a fair bit of what we've talked about this morning, and we'll spend a few minutes picking this apart. So we have a sample stock ticker here. You can see these prices are just being randomly generated. We can go next, you know, and get different currency pairs, different pricings, different news results. Okay. So, but if we actually have a look at view page source here, at the payloads, okay, we can actually see that here we have our initial metadata payload response, okay, and so the client is actually, or when the server is doing the markup, because that specification doesn't exist yet that says, well, here's a home where you can go to get this data. So we're actually going to take a look at this. So let's copy this link, and we might as well use this page. Okay, and we can actually see that, okay, here's the method callback that's going to be used, and here are the resources that we're actually going to pass in. So you can see for the listing of sample currencies, okay, or for the listing, we can actually go to sample currencies, and then for news, we can actually go to news and go to a particular ID. And so we have that, which is really cool, which gives us the base of what we need in the page. And so what we next do is we go off and get the list of currencies, and so we can do that. And let me have a look. Oops, let's go on and download that. Lots of fun. Just give me 2 seconds. Show a folder. Okay. Okay. And we can actually see here what was actually passed back by the server. And we can actually see that we have a collection here. And then we actually have, let me see if I can make this a little bit more readable. That's a little bit nasty. Let's see, give me 2 secs. Okay, so actually you can see here we've got a list of these objects, and inside of each object, okay, we have an ID, we have a name, okay, and then we actually have links. Okay, and this is part of where I was talking about the data being self-subscribing and saying where it can actually go to find the data. So what we do is we can have multiple links, as you can see by this array here, and what we can do is search through that array, looking to see, well, I want to pull out the URL for quotes. Okay, and we know that, okay, that URL actually exists here. And so this is how the data can be self-subscribing. Okay, so that's how we set that up. So once the page renders, we get our initial metadata dump, okay, into the screen. That's picked up by this method. Okay, processes it, discovers where the listing exists. We go and request that listing. The listing describes whereabouts you can go to get the streaming quotes for each of the different currency pairs, and then we start polling for those requests. In addition, what we do is we go off and get the news results. Okay, and we know where the news results are. Okay, from this initial metadata that we got here, and we can see that we want a /ID. This URI template will be resolved to something aligned to this. So I go, right, we have an ID, and we go AUD USD. Okay, or if it was Euro or a Great British Pound, okay, then we would get different URIs being generated. And so that's how that one's wired up. And then as we go next and previous, we're just paging through the different data results. Now, if we actually take a look at some of this network traffic, we'll see some more things being highlighted. You'll see here all the polling going on. If we take a look at this and actually have a look at our headers, okay, you can actually see that in the content type, let's see if we can minimize that so it's a little less distracting. Here you can see the content type we're actually passing back, and we're saying instead of it just being application slash JSON, we're actually saying that in this we are vendor sample, okay, and the data is of type quote, and it's version 1 of that data payload. And so, yeah, that's how we're actually doing this, versus if we go off and start getting another payload, you'll see same thing with still quotes. But if we actually take a look at the news results, okay, so I've just selected the news from the request that was made, and we can actually see the type we are now expecting is of type news, hence the payload itself. And we can actually take a look at what that data actually looks like here. And you can actually see that in our news payload, we again have the links to where it can actually go to get the news. We could have just put HTML into these, or had another resource or property here called URI or something like that. But when we're trying to describe links, this is the typical convention that is used because it allows you to describe multiple links. So what happens if you had the link for where the news is versus who the original source was versus any number of different things. Okay, and instead of it just being a simple property like this and then having the value like this, we actually define it this way. Again, much more flexible in terms of implementation. So this is how it's put together. I see there's one question we'll just take a look at. Oh, happy birthday. And so what I'm doing is I'm going to switch over to Visual Studio, and we're going to have a look at how some of this stuff is put together. So as you can see here, this is coming back to some of the earlier stuff that we were looking at. When we've got pure JSON data, MVC out of the box, and I am making a little bit of assumption that people are familiar with JSON, result sets, and MVC. We can actually pass in an anonymous method here, object, sorry, and say that we allow gets, which is everything that we've been doing today, and then our data will be serialized to JSON. Likewise, I can actually have a JSONP result here, okay, and this is a custom result, and we can actually go here and take a look at how this is actually made up. And Nick has got a reference sample here of how you can actually do this and get where you can get this code. You can see we're doing a little bit of detection here. We're saying that, okay, let's set up our content types all correctly, and then let's have a look to see if there's a callback parameter. Otherwise, convention says we call a generic method called callback, and then we serialize our data using this particular format where we put the method or the callback name here, and then we put the serialized payload here. Okay, and that's everything that you've been seeing tonight, or today, wherever you are, into this payload. So method name, and then that's going to call function name, and that's going to call an actual callback, which is kind of cool. And so further on, we can actually see that in our cause result, okay, where we actually allow this, is I've actually created an attribute here, a filter attribute, that will actually say, on executing, we actually want to add onto the header. So this is important from a server implementation point of view. If you want to allow, let's say, browsers coming from different domains to be able to access your resources. So you might be creating a mapping service or a currency service or whatever else, and if you want people to be able to call that directly from within the browser, this is an attribute that you're going to get extremely familiar with. And you can declare this at a action level or at a controller level. You can even do it as an application-wide thing if that's what your desire is. And you can actually start with, depending on how you actually filter, you can go into a lot of detail as into what domains you actually want to allow. In this case, star by convention says anyone can access that, and so we just want to facilitate that. Lastly, you can also, or not lastly, but we can also see that we have content, how we define content types here. And you can see that I'm not doing anything in this case particularly fancy to say, hey, look, this is a person, for instance, versus some other object. But you definitely could have a mapping in here that goes, well, what is the type of the object that's been passed in? What have I been asked to serialize? And then actually generate the required content type description based off that. So there's a lot of different things you can do here, and as you can see, again, I've just hard-coded the version here. This was just for brevity and simplicity. This is probably something that you would get from the models. Okay, maybe you'd have an attribute on the model which would say which version it is, and you'd actually put that in. Now, as a side point on versioning, you might see a lot of APIs using version numbers in the actual URI. So GitHub is a typical example with their API where they might have /version3 inside of their API. And let me see, I'll show you that in a sec. But it would look something like this if we're not running. So it might be GitHub, .com. Helps if I can type /API. And then they might have /v3 person, or in their case repository or whatever else. And you might be going, well, what's the difference between this, okay, putting this in the URL versus putting it inside of the content type? When you have, this can get religious, so there's a lot of people who have a lot of opinions about how this works. This is just from my observations. When you start putting the version number into the URI, it means that when I go from version 3 to 4, this person, okay, or this resource, okay, that follows that version number is no longer the same resource or no longer the same document at all. It's a completely different document. Now, it might be still called person, but when we go from 3 to 4, it's completely different, okay? And clients should treat it as that, okay? As in, all caching should be broken, everything should change. That's a fairly hard change, okay? If it's just an extra property you've added or something like that, well, probably what you'd want to go to isn't actually 3 to 4, but from 3 to 3.1 or something. And when you start doing this, you're no longer describing that, well, this is a minor change, because it's happening at the URI level. You're actually describing that, hey, this is a pretty big change, okay? Hence, when we'd actually try and define a smaller change like that, if this was a GitHub service up here, we'd probably go 3.1 up here, okay? And that means that we get much more fine-grained control without breaking everyone along the way. Okay, so general rule of thumb, if things are completely changed, then you'd put the version number here, versus if you're doing small incremental changes and it's not everything is particularly changed, then you put it up here. The other side point is that when you put the version actually here in the URL positionally, i.e. preceding like the different documents that are described, you're actually saying that everything beyond this point has changed. Now, you might have only just completely changed person, and repo is exactly the same as what it was. And that's one of the downsides of this type of versioning, is that you've actually said to any clients who are tapping in that, hey, look, this is all completely changed. So you'll start seeing people putting the version numbers at the end here as a way of being able to have finer grained control over saying, well, repo is at version 3 versus person is at version 4. Okay, so that gives you a lot more control there. Continuing on with our examples here, and you can see that here I've got the cache control action. I've just added to the response payload, the caching data. That was more so I just so I could show you how this was actually affecting headers, and there wasn't actually any black magic going on here. Ideally, you'd use an attribute here, and you'd say that, hey, I want this to be cached for this more amount of time, and with the same way that some of these other action results work, or action filters, sorry, it would add that on. But for simplicity's sake, I did do that here. Now, lastly, coming back around to the sample that we had, we can actually see that I'm doing very similar things as to what we were just showing. We have the initial metadata payload, which is described in this property, and I'm sending it down in a JSONP result. So when someone calls this endpoint, they'll get all the metadata. Then when there's a currency list, when they're after the listing that we described previously, that's where I put on what the types are. And as mentioned here, we are sample, and the type is currency. Bless me. And then when we actually generating request or a quote, we're accepting the ID. I'm pulling out the semantics of how this works isn't really all that important, but I'm generating a min, I'm generating a max, okay, and then from that I'm also appending on the media type. Again, really simple to do. And then, for news, I'm actually saying, well, you can actually cache this for a particular period of time. You don't have to come back to me all the time. And I could also do that for the metadata payload just as easily. And here's the format that I'm describing. And note, I probably should be describing that same content types up here, because that would be vdn.sample.metadata or something like that. And so I'll open up the floor to questions. So that's kind of the landscape of everything that we're looking at. And as I mentioned before in some of the other stuff, I hope I've shown that it very much is a practical approach to REST, and how you can evolve your systems to be more RESTful and take on some of these best practices that people are talking about in the industry, and are trying to encourage us to move towards. And we by seeing this, hopefully you can see that yes, it is very obtainable and very achievable. So if anyone has any questions, I'll be sticking around to answer any of those questions. Yeah, thank you very much for coming along. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a good rest of your day wherever you are in the world. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, what we're going to do is look at some of the questions as they come in. First one is Andre saying, there's a comment, great webcast. I'm at getlinks.com already, so it didn't take long. And also, I got a question to you, Anthony. How long did it take you and Nick to get to your first official 1.0 release milestone? And how, where did the idea come from to get Glimpse up and running?
Yeah, that's a great question. So to get to V1 took about a year and a half, which sounds like a lot, which it was. And that was basically because of a lot of different things that happened, which I'll explain in terms of history. So where the idea for Glimpse came from was Nick and I were standing on a sublay platform one day, and we were kind of discussing how difficult it was to try and convey to different developers the idea of MVC in this particular case. And, a lot of the conventions over configurations that it has and other like frameworks. And, wouldn't it be great if there was some way of being able to expose what is actually happening on the server and how the server is interpreting different rules and stuff like this. And, at that point, Nick kind of scratched his chin, as he does, and said, hey, wait, back in the day, when we were doing Cold Fusion development, we actually had this display at the bottom of the page that actually showed a lot of this detail, i.e. even down to the point of showing a generated SQL. And from that, we're like, wow, that's cool. How come no one's ever, brought this concept forward? And at around that same time, Mix 11 was coming along, and the John Popper was hosting an open source fest. And we thought, wow, what a cool idea would it be to try and build this and show it at the Open Source Fest, and he was looking for projects to participate. So I went home and created a GitHub repository, had no code in it, just a description, and we sent that off, and next day we got accepted. So we had 5 weeks to produce, which was the initial version of Glimpse. And so as you can imagine, it was a lot of late nights and very early mornings like this, trying to get everything ready in time for the fest. And as it turns out, when we showed off what we had, it resonated with a lot of people and made a lot of sense for a lot of people. So at the time, we kind of considered Glimpse to be Firebug for the server, but I think that view has changed and evolved now. We can support multiple server backends, as what a lot of this talk has been about, is the evolution of how we got to that. We also realize that we sit, a lot of our value comes from being able to understand frameworks. So, for instance, when you put a breakpoint in, that's like the 1-foot view of debugging. But what happens if you wanted to stand up at the 10,000-foot view? What would that look like? Or if you're the 8,000 or the 5,000-foot view, how would you break down all of this sort of information? And from that, we started really thinking about it, and what we discovered we had is that we had more of a diagnostics platform. And because we cover both client and server, for instance, we now have like Knockout.js plugins that show you what Knockout's doing, for instance, just the same way as we have MVC plugins. We realize that, yes, we are very much a diagnostics platform. And we receive, regular contributions from the community, which has very much helped us get to where we are today. And pretty much over 6 months ago, RedGate gave us a call and said, hey, look, we really love what you guys are doing. We want to help out. We wanted to see it move faster than what it's doing, because today, Nick and I were only doing it in our spare time. We still need to feed our families and all that sort of stuff. And we weren't able to, commit enough time to the platform to really turn it into what it has become and what it can be. And so they said, hey, look, how would you like to work on it full time, and we'll sponsor the project. So we're very fortunate and very grateful to RedGate for that sponsorship. And they've done a great job of supporting us and the community with their contribution and their support. And that kind of brings us forward to modern day. And in terms of V1, part of the reason it took so long to get to this point, which we have the official release a few weeks back now, is that we realized that when we developed Glimpse, we developed, and this isn't exactly relevant as in line with the talk, but it's interesting nonetheless. We had coupled ourselves to system.web, i.e., we would be looking at a request, trying to generate all this payload, and we would go, system.web.current, query string, get something from the query string or whatever else. And it actually turns out that probably 6 months after that, we made that decision to, start writing code like that. The industry started moving away from using system.web. And some of you might have heard of something called OWIN, which is all about an initiative of, can we create frameworks and code that can run on other servers besides IIS? So, for instance, Web API is a very good implementation of that, where you can actually run Web API on top of IIS, or you can run Web API self-hosted, i.e. in a console app or something like that. And to do that, you need to not be using system.web, because system.web is intrinsically tied to IIS. With Microsoft moving in that direction in the future, with the Katana project, a lot of other open source projects are seeing a lot of value in that. We wanted to be able to provide support for those scenarios. And so we spent the time creating the correct levels of abstraction to say, well, when I get a URI or get a query string, I don't want to be getting that directly from system.web. And that sounds like it's a fairly trivial thing to introduce that abstraction, but it actually turns out it's a little bit of work, given the brevity, the breadth of a lot of what we had. And so we created all the different abstractions, made all of that pluggable, and so now, we only have one implementation at the moment, which is ASP.NET. But you could have like an NancyFX implementation or a web API or whatever else, and it would work in self-hosted scenarios on IIS, on any other server that you could possibly imagine, and you're not tied to IIS in those scenarios. And so that's a little bit of how we got to where we are, and we're actually having a release party for Glimpse, which I might just plug at the moment if I'm allowed to do a little bit of a shameless plug. If you go thanks. So if you have a look at blog.getglimpse, we're actually holding our regular town hall. So as part of being an open source project, we want to be talking to our users and to our community about where we're moving in the future, about what features are coming and what people are after. And we really do want to get that feedback. And so this will become a regular monthly thing where we tell people, hey, look, here's what's available, here's what's happening. And at this virtual release party, we want to, just take the time to say thank you to everyone, show off some of the new stuff that we've got, and kind of explain where we're heading into the future. And so, yeah, please feel free to join along. I think that's in about 2 hours' time now. So, yeah, please come along.
Fantastic. Well, we still got a couple of minutes more. I'm just going to go on. There's one question I quickly want to take care of. It's Michael Siska has just asked. He's saying that first off, he's only just got the email. Michael, we're sorry about that. The invite was sent out weeks ago, and a reminder and an update was sent hours and hours and hours ago. Anyways, he's asking, will it be recorded? Yes, it's been recorded, and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/LIDNUG. But he's asking about Glimpse. How does it compare to Mini Profiler? Does it complement each other?
I think that really comes down to what you're after. Glimpse is, in my opinion, is a bit more of a platform. Meaning that it's very easy to create plugins, and not that it's not. You can do similar things with Mini Profiler, but with a lot of the contracts that we have, like to inject a new tab into Glimpse, is very, very easy. You basically just have a payload, you implement an interface, and it says what's the name that should show up in the tab, and then give me an object. And when you have that object, we handle the serialization of that into JSON and how that JSON should actually look on the screen, so it looks nice. So all of what you're seeing there in the screenshot, hopefully, is just JSON data formatted nicely. And that is a lot of what Glimpse is a fancy rendering engine. So that would be value prop 1 that I would say. Also, we very much do try and look at more than just the numbers case. And I know that Mini Profiler does more than this as well, but I think a lot of where they're focused is what are the raw numbers, what's the timings between X. And as you can see, obviously from our timeline, we very much do that. But we very much try and focus on what I mentioned earlier about, okay, if in debugging and diagnostics, if the 1 foot view is breakpoints and log files and stuff like this, what does the 10,000 foot view look like? And, you know, how does it break down from there? So whenever we're doing work, we sit back and go, okay, well, where's this fit? Is it the 10,000 foot view or the 5,000 foot view? And that gives us a lot of feedback onto, you know, how fine-grained should we actually get with this data. We also look at what type of user are we actually helping here. So we've kind of identified 3 different people that we kind of help. One is someone who's learning. The other is someone who's got a problem, i.e. their routes are playing up and they don't know how to fix it. We can help you there. And lastly, someone who's neither of those people. So they kind of know MVC, they know their application, and they're not having a problem. How can we help them? And that's where we're actually starting to look at, you know, what can we actually do to help support those users. And particularly in that category, we've got stuff coming out hopefully soon, which will do a lot of the support there. Glimpse has got a fairly small footprint, even though the UI looks big. With the way that we actually get our data, we don't, it's fairly light, but we do have a perception of being heavy. So we're looking to address that. We're also looking at trying to see, you know, does a cut down version of Glimpse make more sense, at least from a UI point of view, for people, or do we just need to, you know, do a better job of that 10,000 foot view? So I'd expect a lot to come out from that very soon. In terms of getting your own data into this, so for instance, I know Mini Profiler allows you to do your own tracing statements and stuff like that. Glimpse allows you to do the same, and in this case, it would show those timings in the timeline here as well. Hence, visually being able to fit it in context. So it's very much up to you with what you're after. We are trying to iterate very fast on this stuff. We think it has a lot of potential. We do consider ourselves very much a platform, and with that, we do make certain considerations, i.e., you know, what extensibility points we put in, etc. So I'm not 100% sure if that answers your complete question. That's kind of where we feel we sit. I guess, you know, look over the coming months, you know, at some of the new stuff that we've got visions for, and hopefully you'll find that it really does help, and sits at the intersection of those 2 axes of, you know, what foot level does this sit, and who is it actually helping. Do we have any other questions out there from people? Feel free to hit me up on Twitter if you've got any questions after the fact. Again, this is where you can find us.
Excellent. Thanks. Sorry about that. My phone had just muted itself.
That's all right.
Just a couple of questions more if you have a minute or two.
Yeah, absolutely.
Robert Tenenbaum is asking, regarding decoupling apps and servers, why would the server developer build a service to feed data according to this spec without knowing that there is an app out there to read it, and vice versa? Why would an app developer build an app to these specs without knowing that there's a service that serves up the data in this way?
Okay. Very good point. I think that's true in an ideal world, but we also have services evolve and change. So let's say Netflix, hopefully everyone's familiar with Netflix, has services, or GitHub has services that you can contact and get the data. And at the point of building the server, you know, I guess GitHub knew that there would be clients, but they didn't know exactly which ones yet. I'm sure they were spooning a lot of that work. But they would have been creating it in mind, not knowing exactly who's out there, and so, or at least having some archetypes internally of who they were trying to solve. And in terms of building the client, of course, you're not going to be building it without a server, and you're going to be building it to a spec. But as we've mentioned, that spec can change. And a lot of this stuff comes down to semantics, i.e., a URI. What happens if you do want to change that structure? Okay, the server should be able to change that structure on its clients without breaking those clients. So, for instance, in Glimpse, you would have seen a lot of those URIs, might be glimpse.axt $r equals, request, ampersand ID equals some good. That's what it looks like under web forms. We should be able to have a completely different URI structure under MVC, for instance, glimpse / request / an ID, a much neater URL. And the client should be agnostic of which form the server wants to work with. So I think a lot of it's around that. Also, a lot around these semantics. If you are building a client, knowing that the server payload that you're getting from the server is what you built it to, i.e., when we're looking at the content types before, knowing that, hey, I've requested the resource that I've been requesting every day for the last 50 days or 100 days or 2 years or whatever else, and that it is news as I expect it to be, that I'm getting back as in the media type, as in the schemas fits news, and that it's a correct version. Okay, because even though you might trust the service you're connecting to, it's not unheard of for service developers to change things, and so having the logic within your client to be able to at least handle a little bit of that change and flex is a good thing. And so I don't think any of this is around around building stuff without specs or around not knowing who's who, what, or where. But it's about how do we make things more resilient? How do we make things less coupled? Hopefully that answers your question. If you've got something else in there, just send through a further question.
Excellent. Everybody can see Anthony's email, or as he says, pester him on Twitter, and he's fairly active on Twitter, I should just say. And so is Nick Molnar. Let's see. The last one. Okay, Nick is asking, what's the difference between Marmite and Vegemite?
Okay. I wonder if that's Nick.
Yeah.
Okay. Someone else might be able to answer this. It's been ages since I've had Marmite. Vegemite just tastes better if you ask me. But that's me. I think Marmite. Yeah. Marmite is a bit, I don't know the word, brickier? I don't even know if that's a word, but that's how I describe it.
Yeah, I agree. I tried Marmite the first time, obviously, in the UK, and I must admit that it doesn't taste quite like Vegemite. Vegemite is also easy to spread, I found. I don't know why. It isn't as, it's hard to explain actually what the difference is. But flavor-wise, I like Vegemite better as well.
Yeah. No, Vegemite rocks. And there is a common, I think, misconception out there that Vegemite and Marmite are interchangeable. And I just want to, debunk that right now. They're not. If you like Vegemite, you like Vegemite. I don't know too many people who like both. And typically in Australia, we get Vegemite. As far as I know, it's just as hard to get Marmite here in Australia as it is in the US, for instance. It's not the sort of thing you just see on your average supermarket shelf that I know of, anyway. But I don't usually look for it because Marmite doesn't exist. So.
Exactly. For those that doesn't know what Vegemite or Marmite is, it's a yeast-based bread spread that has what my kids call an acquired taste. Both my kids love it, though, I must admit. It took me a while for me to get used to it. But it's one of those spreads that you are sparingly spreading on your bread. You don't do it like a good jam. But it's very high in vitamin D and C or something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Did you know that Vegemite and Marmite actually got blocked from sale in Denmark?
No way.
Yeah, they blocked it. Can't remember something about unprocessed or processed something. Because it had such a high vitamin content. Apparently, it wasn't constituted as a bread spread or condiment, but more as a vitamin. Yeah.
Okay, I can just see it sitting in the pharmacy.
Exactly. Anyways, I think that's it. If anybody has more questions, feel free to fire them on to Anthony. And I think those that are here that wants to know a bit more, it was the added vitamins. Michael Siska, who happens to be living in Denmark now, says that Vegemite fails to get approval in Denmark because of added vitamins. Yeah, as if added vitamins is bad for you. Anyways, go to the town hall, your virtual launch, if you want to know a bit more, and rub shoulder for some of the cool kids that get involved with open source and use this already. It's in, I think it's in 1.5 hours or 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I think it's in an hour and a half. So I'm a bit sleepy, so I'm a little confused, but I'll be getting up again for it. But I'm getting up in an hour and a half, so there you go. So hopefully I've got that time right.
Fantastic. Anthony, I want to say thank you very much for...
Yeah, it's in 1 hour, actually. Sorry.
Okay.
So there you go.
Oh, yeah. 1 hour. That's going to be a short sleep, man. Anyways, I want to say thank you, Anthony, for coming in here and presenting for our members. It was, I think everybody was here, learned quite a lot. Just saw something that I think many didn't expect to see to that extent. And to be honest, I would like you and Nick back again to go through some more aspects of GIMPs and what else you can use it for. Because I'm sure that there is tons of extensions, there's different methods, and there's probably some more advanced stuff we could look at as well.
Yeah, more than happy to come back and talk about some GIMP specific stuff. So
fantastic. Well, if anybody have any questions, fire them off to Anthony. And I just want to remind everybody that Peter Shorty Shaw has turned 40 years old today. I want to do a poll about how old people thought Shorty was. But the fact is, he is one of the oldest group managers we have here today. And I'm taking this opportunity while we're still recording to immortalize this particular aspect, because he's not here. All right, thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your patience with the time zone mistake we had. I hope we see you all again at our next event on the 4th of April. And again, we want to see Anthony back next time, also together with Nick Molnar, I suspect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody.